Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of dense material, the books, the research, the deep thinking, and give you the ultimate shortcut to being well-informed.
And today we are cracking open a theory of management that, it really changes how you look at everything.
It completely flips the script on power, on hierarchy, and maybe most importantly, where authority actually comes from in an organization.
We are getting into the foundational theories of Chester Barnard.
Specifically his landmark work from 1938, The Functions of the Executive.
What's so fascinating here, and it's what really sets Barnard apart, is that he was a practitioner philosopher.
Right.
We often study this stuff through the lens of academics, people observing from the outside. Barnard was the total opposite.
He was in the trenches.
Deep in the trenches. He spent nearly 40 years running things at Bell Telephone and then went on to head the Rockefeller Foundation. So his ideas, they didn't come from a textbook. They came from actually running these huge, complex systems.
Okay, so let's unpack that. We're dealing with a text that, yeah, it's old, but it created this crucial bridge. It took us from the rigid, almost mechanical world of early management.
Oh, like Frederick Taylor with his stopwatches and efficiency charts.
Exactly. From that to the behavioral approach, the one that focuses on people, on psychology, on, choice. He saw that the old, purely rules-based classical theory just wasn't working.
It wasn't, because the classical view treated people almost like, like interchangeable cogs in a machine.
Yeah.
And Barnard looked at this whole setup and realized, wait a second, if the people don't actively choose to participate, this entire machine just grinds to a halt. His work is that pivot point.
He basically ushered in this new era where things like motivation, communication, and social systems suddenly became central to how we think about management.
So that's really our mission today. We want to move beyond the org chart and understand how this incredibly successful practitioner defined what an organization even is.
And what levers an executive has to pull to earn cooperation, not just demand it.
And if you think about it, Barnard's starting question was so simple. Why do we even bother with organizations at all? Why can't we just work alone?
And his answer starts with this almost bleak assessment of the individual. He argues that humans are just inherently limited, severely so.
Precisely. That is the absolute starting point. He says, look, we're limited biologically, we get tired, we have finite endurance, we have to sleep.
We're limited physically. One person can't lift a 10-ton block.
Right, or oversee operations on 3 continents at once. But then, and this is crucial, he adds that we're limited cognitively and socially. Our personal knowledge is finite. Our access to resources is tiny.
So all these limitations mean that trying to achieve big, complex goals on your own is, well, it's basically impossible.
So the organization isn't born out of convenience. It's born out of pure necessity.
The only solution, then, is cooperation.
Exactly. We form organizations for one reason: to pool our resources, to synchronize our efforts, and to overcome all those biological, physical, and cognitive barriers that hold us back as individuals.
And this is where his definition gets really specific. For Barnard, an organization isn't the building. It's not the boxes on a chart. It's a system of consciously coordinated activities of 2 or more persons.
The key words there are system, consciousness, and coordination. That's everything.
It's the mechanism of effort.
It is. If you have 2 people working next to each other, but they have separate goals they haven't talked about, that's not an organization.
They only become one the moment they align their efforts toward a shared goal that they both understand.
And that gives us that synergy nugget.
Which is that the organization, the whole, has to be greater than the sum of its parts.
It has to be.
If 2 people cooperate and only achieve what one person could have done in double the time, the organization has failed. It hasn't solved the problem it was created to solve.
It has completely failed. And that definition, right there, it sets such a high bar for what it means to be effective. It means the executive can't just focus on getting tasks done.
No, they have to focus on optimizing the coordination, the links between the people, to get outputs that were literally unimaginable for any one of them alone.
And that, right there, is the core purpose of management: enhancing our collective capacity.
Okay, so we know why organizations exist, to get past our human limits through cooperation. So now we get into the mechanics. What are the absolute must-haves, the 3 pillars that have to be there for this whole system to even exist and keep going?
Barnard distilled it down to 3 things that are just completely non-negotiable. He saw it as a kind of triangle.
Yeah.
If any one side fails, the whole thing just collapses.
And those are
A common purpose, a willingness to contribute, and effective communication.
common purpose. That sounds like the easiest one, but I bet in the real world it's the one that gets messed up the most. It's the shared goal, right?
It is, but think about a huge company. That purpose can get so abstract, so watered down. The executive's real job isn't just to, declare the mission statement.
You tell them that.
It's to constantly translate it, to redefine it, so that every single person can connect what they do every day, no matter how small, to that big objective. If the person in the mailroom doesn't see how getting the post out fast helps secure shareholder value, then the purpose has failed.
And that second pillar, willingness to contribute, that's where the behavioral part really kicks in. It's not enough to just pay someone. They have to choose to give their full effort.
It's about commitment, not just compliance.
And the third, communication, is the circulatory system.
Exactly. Barnard saw it as way more than just memos and meetings. It is the living mechanism that links the person, their effort, their contribution, and that shared purpose all together.
Yeah.
Without it, you could have people who want to work and who know the goal, but their efforts are all over the place.
You get parallel effort, not cooperative effort.
Precisely.
This whole idea of willingness leads us right into what I think is his most powerful insight on motivation, the contribution satisfaction equilibrium.
This is the core. This is his motivation balance sheet.
Right.
Barnard knew that people aren't just altruistic and they're not just greedy. They're constantly, maybe even unconsciously, running a calculation in their heads. They're comparing what they give.
Their effort, their time, the frustration, their emotional energy.
Versus what they get back. The benefits, or what he called the inducements.
So every single day, you're subconsciously asking yourself, is this worth it? Is this worth the commute, the difficult boss, the boring task?
Exactly. And real 100% commitment, what Barnard called effectiveness, that only happens if the benefits you receive are clearly greater than the effort you have to put in.
That's what gives you net satisfaction.
And if the benefits fall short, if the effort required is way more than what you're getting back, your commitment will absolutely crumble. You can force someone to show up, but you can't force them to give their all if their mental balance sheet is in the red.
That makes the executive's job so much more complex. You can't just command people to work harder. You have to constantly manage the inducements to make sure that scale is always tipping towards satisfaction.
And this is why he moved so far beyond the classical economists who just thought, people work for money, end of story.
Yet that view was way too simple.
Yeah.
It couldn't explain why two people getting paid the same amount would have totally different levels of commitment.
Right. So Barnard broke down inducements into these 2 big categories that a manager has to juggle at all times.
First up, we have the general incentives. These are the environmental things, right? The conditions that affect everyone and make the organization a place you actually want to be.
And within that, he details 4 really critical and mostly social factors. The first one is associative attractiveness.
Which is just, do you like the people you work with?
Basically, yeah. Is there social compatibility? Is there mutual respect? That social vibe is a huge incentive, sometimes more powerful than a raise.
It's the simple joy of working with people who don't drive you crazy.
Exactly. Second is working conditions. The basic comfort, the safety, the physical space. It matters. If the office is freezing cold or the equipment is ancient, the extra effort you have to spend just to tolerate it immediately tips that balance sheet in the wrong direction.
Then you have opportunity. And this isn't just about a promotion in 3 years. It's the immediate feeling that you're part of something big, something significant.
A sense of mission, belonging to a major effort, even if your own role feels small.
And the last one under general incentives is communication, but defined here as just, friendly interaction and camaraderie.
It reinforces that social side. If communication is open and friendly, it cuts down on friction and makes people want to stick around and contribute. These 4 things create the ecosystem where cooperation can actually thrive.
But those are for everyone. He also knew you have to tailor things to the individual, which brings us to specific incentives.
Correct. These are for hitting the personal needs that drive a specific person's contribution. First one is the obvious one, material incentives. Salary, bonuses, stuff.
But the next 2 categories are where the real behavioral insight comes in. We have non-material incentives, all about status and recognition.
Yes. Prestige, power, distinction. The feeling of being recognized for doing great work, having a special title, getting praised in public. These things satisfy really deep psychological needs for status and self-worth that money often can't touch.
And then there's the category that really separates Barnard from everyone who came before him. Ideal benefactions.
These are the internal rewards, the psychological, the moral drivers.
Like what?
Pride in your work, the satisfaction you get from service, like patriotism or contributing to your community or knowing you're providing for your family. These can be the most powerful drivers of all because they tap into your core values.
Right.
Think about a scientist working around the clock to find a cure. Their ideal benefaction is wiping out a disease, and that reward is so huge it makes the long hours seem trivial.
So a good executive has to master this whole spectrum, general and specific, material and ideal, to make sure that contribution satisfaction scale is always tipping in the right direction.
If you just rely on money, you're going to get the bare minimum effort required to not get fired because you haven't cultivated any of the social, the prestige, or the ideal rewards that create real commitment.
It's a dynamic system, not just a payroll calculation.
Exactly. And if that system fails, commitment plummets, willingness to contribute just evaporates, and the organization collapses back into a bunch of limited individuals, the whole cooperative effort becomes useless.
This talk about incentives and social environments brings us right to structure. Barnard saw the official org chart and realized, wait, that's not the whole story. There are actually two structures running at the same time.
Yes, you have the formal structure. That's the official hierarchy, the rules, the roles, the thing HR hands you on your first day.
But then you have the powerful, often invisible, informal structure.
Which he describes so well as the structureless, shapeless personal contacts. It's the friendships, the alliances, the chats by the coffee machine, the bonds you form outside the official chain of command.
And his big insight was that the formal organization actually creates the informal one. It's inevitable.
It is. You put people together, make them coordinate their work, share stress, solve problems. They're naturally going to form bonds and friendships and shared norms. And the executive who ignores that informal structure is, they're missing half the operating system.
I can see why a manager might think the informal structure is dangerous, though. It's uncontrollable. It's the grapevine, the rumor mill. It's where company policies are really judged and maybe even sabotaged.
Oh, it can absolutely be a disruptive force. But Barnard's point was that it's also critically necessary. These informal groups do things for the organization that the formal structure simply can't.
Okay, let's break those down. First, he says they make communication smoother.
Right. The grapevine, for all its faults, is often way faster at spreading important news than the official memo. A smart manager knows how to use that informal network to add context and meaning that a formal, rigid email could never have.
Second, they offer a kind of psychological protection.
Yes, they protect your dignity and they reduce fear. If you're part of a supportive little group, you feel less exposed to the pressures and the sometimes arbitrary demands of the formal system. That sense of shared fate is vital for keeping people sane and preventing burnout.
Which, in turn, supports their willingness to contribute.
Exactly.
But the most crucial function, and you mentioned this earlier, it links directly to our next big topic. These informal groups play a huge role in stabilizing authority.
They do. They act like cultural filters. They set the norms for behavior. They're the ones who communicate what's normal, how much effort is acceptable, which rules you can kind of bend, and which orders from the boss you follow without even thinking about it. They help create the environment where the acceptance theory of authority can actually work.
This is probably the biggest challenge Barnard threw at the classical theory, and honestly, at every manager who thinks their job title is the source of their power.
For centuries, the thinking was that authority lives in the position. The king, the general, the boss, they have the right to command.
And the subordinate has the duty to obey. It flows from the top down. Simple.
Barnard just flips that entire script. He argues that authority only exists if the subordinate accepts the order. This is his acceptance theory of authority. Real power resides with the person being managed, not the manager giving the orders.
That's a massive paradigm shift. It means the CEO's command has zero actual authority if the person who receives it just decides to ignore it, or misunderstands it, or finds a way around it.
Exactly. A manager might give 100 orders a day. If the employees reject 10 of them, that manager only has 90 units of real functional authority. Their power isn't in their office. It's granted to them, moment by moment, by the voluntary consent of their team.
So the executive is basically in a constant state of earning that consent.
Constantly.
So if the employee is the one with the veto power, what's the test? What are the criteria they're applying when they decide whether to say yes or no?
Barnard laid out 4 very specific sequential conditions that an employee applies to every single order, whether they realize it or not, and if an order fails even one of these tests, it's likely to be rejected.
Okay, condition 1, they have to understand the order.
Simple enough. If the command is vague or confusing or contradicts something else they were told, they can't comply. Authority nullified.
2, the order has to clearly match the organization's goal. The employee has to see the connection between the task you're asking them to do and the big picture, the common purpose we talked about.
If an order seems totally pointless, or worse, like it's actually hurting the main goal, they'll reject it. They'll see it as just an arbitrary power trip.
3, it has to match their personal interests. This goes right back to that contribution satisfaction balance sheet.
It does. If an order demands a sacrifice that is way out of line with the inducements, like, say, work every weekend for the next month with no extra pay, it violates their mental contract and they're going to push back.
And finally, number 4, they have to be physically and mentally able to do it.
Right. If they don't have the skills, the resources, or the stamina, the order is impossible. And you can't command the impossible. A manager telling a receptionist to go fix a crashed server, that order has no authority because the receptionist is unable to comply.
This makes managers incredibly vulnerable then. Giving vague, pointless, or impossible orders isn't just bad management, it's an act of self-sabotage. You're actively chipping away at the very authority you need to function.
And this leads us right into the most practical, actionable concept for any manager in Barnard's entire theory, the zone of indifference.
Let's define this really clearly for everyone, because this is where the theory becomes a tool you can use every day. The zone of indifference is that psychological range of orders a person will just accept automatically.
Without questioning, without analyzing, without debating, they just say, yep, got it.
It's the space of automatic compliance.
It is. When an employee is highly satisfied, when those inducements are consistently way better than the effort required, they develop a huge zone of indifference. Asking them to file an extra report or stay 10 minutes late is no big deal. They just do it because the overall deal is so good.
But if they're underpaid, overworked, and they hate their team, that zone of indifference shrinks to almost nothing.
Right. Suddenly, every tiny request, use the new cover sheet, come to a meeting 5 minutes early, falls into what you could call the zone of denial. They question everything. They push back on everything.
So the goal for a manager isn't to use threats or force. It's to constantly work to expand that zone of indifference.
And you do that not by commanding, but by managing the whole behavioral system. You use great communication, you foster positive informal groups, and most of all, you provide superior incentives that tip that contribution satisfaction scale heavily in the employee's favor.
This is where it gets a little cynical, though. A little manipulative, maybe. If authority is so psychological, Barnard points out that executives sometimes use what he called the fiction of authority.
This is a really powerful and, yeah, maybe a little dark aspect of leadership. The idea is that an executive can use myths or beliefs, things that might not even be 100% true, to get control and maintain order without having to watch over everyone's shoulder.
So the myth itself creates the compliance. The classic example from the sources is the river that internet usage is being monitored.
Precisely. Whether IT is actually tracking every single click is almost irrelevant. The belief that they are, the fiction, is enough to stop people from wasting time. It maintains control by tapping into our psychological desire to follow the rules we think exist.
But that seems so risky. If the fiction gets exposed, if the manager gets caught in the lie, that whole system of acceptance and trust could just shatter. The zone of indifference could vanish overnight.
It does raise ethical questions, for sure, about the necessary use of ambiguity in management, but it all just reinforces Barnard's main point. Real, sustainable authority can't rely on tricks or just a fancy title.
He argued that the most solid source of authority comes from something else.
From demonstrated leadership, people will naturally grant authority to those who are clearly more skilled, more knowledgeable, more competent than they are.
So if the head of engineering really is the best engineer in the company, people follow her technical orders out of genuine respect for her expertise, not just because of her title.
Exactly. That kind of competence grants an authority that no org chart ever could.
Okay, shifting gears a little. Barnard was really unique because he didn't just see the executive as a rational machine optimizing tasks. He went deep into the moral responsibility of leadership. He knew that cooperation isn't just about efficiency, it's about ethics.
That's right. For him, responsibility wasn't just about following the company handbook. It was about adhering to your own complex internal moral code. He saw that every person in an organization is juggling multiple and sometimes conflicting codes all at once.
Like what kind of codes?
You have legal codes, religious codes, professional codes like a doctor's oath or an engineer's standards, and of course your own deeply held personal and family values.
So you bring your entire moral operating system with you to work, and the organization's demands are just one more layer on top of all that.
Precisely. And the crisis hits when those codes clash, when the organization asks you to do something that violates one of your other codes.
The classic dilemma. My boss wants me to cut corners on safety to hit a deadline, but my professional code as an engineer says that's wrong.
Or, my boss wants me to lie to a client, but my religion forbids lying. That internal conflict is immense, and it leads to two really terrible outcomes that can just destroy a willing contributor.
First, he says you get paralysis.
The internal conflict between these deeply held values is so great that the person just freezes, they can't make a choice, so they do nothing.
And the second outcome is guilt. They obey the boss, they lie to the client, but they've violated their personal code. That guilt leads to burnout, to poor performance, and eventually they just quit.
The organization got the single act of compliance, but it lost the person.
So organizational efficiency is directly tied to the moral health of its employees.
It is. So what's the solution for the executive? How does a great leader solve this inevitable clash of values?
You can't just tell them to pick one code over the other, because either way you get paralysis or guilt, and both of those kill contribution.
This, for Barnard, is the true test of high-level executive skill. He said the leader must find an innovative strategy.
Meaning a creative, new solution, a third way that manages to satisfy both of the clashing moral codes. It's about getting above the dilemma, not just picking a side.
Let's take that lying example. A mediocre manager just pressures the employee to lie. A truly innovative executive understands the conflict. They see the employee's need for truthfulness and the organization's need to protect certain information.
So what's the innovative strategy there?
It might be to redefine the task entirely. Find a way to report the necessary information with complete honesty, but maybe by reframing the context, or by offering a different solution that meets the client's needs without the falsehood. It takes real moral creativity.
So the executive becomes more than just a taskmaster. They're an arbitrator of human values.
Exactly. A moral architect, really. Building a system that tries to minimize these conflicts, because if you don't, you can't get the cooperation you need.
So if the executive's job is to manage all this, motivation, morals, authority, they need a solid system to do it. And for Barnard, that system, the absolute backbone of everything, is communication.
Not just as a tool, but as the central executive function. It's what holds the entire cooperative effort together.
He literally said that the #1 job of an executive is not setting goals and maximizing profit. It's to build and maintain a communication system. It's the nervous system of the organization. If it fails, the body fails.
And because he came from Bell Telephone, a company obsessed with this stuff, he didn't just leave it as a vague idea. He laid out 7 concrete rules for an effective communication system that are still so relevant today.
Let's run through them, because this is the really practical advice. Rule 1, channels must be known.
Simple, but critical. Everyone has to know how information is supposed to flow and who's responsible for what. Any confusion there just leads to paralysis.
2, there must be a formal channel to everyone.
This is about inclusion. Nobody, no matter their rank, should be cut off from official information. It kills the rumor mill and promotes transparency.
3, the line should be short and direct.
The fewer steps information has to go through, the faster it moves, and more importantly, the less chance it has to get distorted or misinterpreted along the way.
Rule 4, generally, use the full line. Don't skip levels.
This is huge management principle. If a senior exec is constantly going around a middle manager to talk to their team, they completely destroy that middle manager's authority.
You're undermining the very system you're trying to build.
Exactly. Rule 3, being direct, is good, but violating Rule 4, skipping levels, is destructive.
5, people in communication centers, the managers, the officers, must be competent.
If the people whose job it is to manage the flow of information can't do it well, they become a bottleneck that breaks the whole system. Communication skill is a core executive competency.
6, the line must not be interrupted. The system has to work when you need it, especially in a crisis.
It's about reliability. If the system only works some of the time, trust just disappears.
And Rule 7, which sounds so modern, every message must be authenticated. You have to be able to verify it.
You have to know where it came from and that it's legitimate. This prevents that fiction of authority from becoming malicious gossip, and it ensures that critical orders are actually coming from the right person.
So those 7 rules build the infrastructure. But communication is just the input. The output is action, which brings us to decision-making.
And Barnard was a real pioneer here. He defined decision-making as this deliberate, rational process of matching means to ends or methods to goals. His work here hugely influenced later thinkers like Herbert Simon.
And he makes a very sharp distinction between 2 types of decisions.
A huge distinction. First, you have personal decisions. These are the choices you make for yourself. They can be totally illogical, emotional, biased.
Whatever. But organizational decisions, the ones a manager makes in their official role, they must be logical and rational. They have to serve the collective purpose, not your personal feelings.
And within that rational process, he identified 2 parts. The moral component, which is about defining the goal, what should we be doing, and the opportunistic component, which is about the means, what's the best way to do it.
And hidden inside that opportunistic part is the executive's secret weapon for dealing with chaos, the strategic factor.
The strategic factor is this laser-like focus on finding the one limiting factor that, if you fix it, the entire complex problem gets solved. It's about simplifying chaos down to a single point of action.
Let's dig into that because it's so key for modern problem solving. It's about not getting bogged down in symptoms.
Exactly. Let's say a company is losing market share. A non-strategic manager might try to do everything at once. New marketing, lower prices, more training, new products. It's a costly, unfocused mess.
But the executive using the strategic factor looks deeper.
Right. They do the analysis and find that, you know what, the product is great, the marketing is fine. The strategic factor, the one single thing holding everything back, is a broken distribution contract that's keeping the product out of half the country.
So you don't need to do all that other stuff. You just fix that one contract, the strategic factor, and the whole market share problem is solved. It's the difference between trying to empty a swimming pool with a teaspoon and just finding the plug.
It's about finding that single point of high leverage. And the executive's job is to ruthlessly identify it and act on it. That's efficient, targeted decision-making.
So we've covered cooperation, motivation, authority, morality, communication. Let's bring it all together. Let's synthesize this whole deep dive into the 3 core practical jobs of an executive, according to Chester Barnard.
These 3 functions are really the final distillation of his life's work. It's the job description for a leader in any cooperative system, from a tiny startup to a global corporation.
Job number 1, maintain communication.
This is the foundation. You have to build, manage, and guarantee that the nervous system is working, following those 7 rules, so that coordinated action is even possible.
Job 2, secure essential services.
This is the human behavioral heart of the job. It means motivating people. Using that full spectrum of incentives, managing the contribution satisfaction equilibrium, and constantly earning your authority by expanding that zone of indifference.
And finally, job number 3, formulate purpose.
The executive has to define, translate, and constantly reinforce the goals of the organization. They have to make sure that common purpose stays clear and compelling so that all that coordinated activity is actually pointed in the right direction.
And if an executive fails at any one of those 3, if communication breaks, if motivation dies, or if the purpose gets fuzzy, the whole cooperative system just falls apart.
The organization goes back to being just a collection of limited, uncoordinated individuals, totally unable to achieve anything complex.
What a detailed and truly insightful framework. I mean, Barnard's legacy is so clear. He's the one who moved management from being about rigid structures to being about human psychology and behavior.
The organization doesn't work just because the boss says so. It works because the employees, every single day, choose to let it work based on their own complex math of satisfaction.
The 2 ideas that should really stick with you after this are the zone of indifference and the acceptance theory of authority.
They completely redefine power in the workplace. They ground it in consent and communication and human psychology, not just in a title or the ability to punish someone.
So let's take this brilliant framework from the 1930s and drop it right into today's world, a world Barnard could never have imagined. What's the central challenge for executives now?
Well, we established that a huge part of the executive's job is managing that contribution satisfaction equilibrium, and a big piece of that comes from those general incentives, things like associative attractiveness and comradeship.
The social glue, The stuff that happens at the water cooler, in the hallway, working late on a project together.
Exactly. It was all rooted in a shared physical space. But today we have the massive rise of the purely remote, or at least hybrid, workforce.
Where all of that is gone, or at least severely limited.
Right. So here's the question. When those vital general incentives, the spontaneous informal chats, the easy camaraderie, are taken away by a virtual environment, how does that fundamentally change the executive's job? If that informal structure is weaker, how do you build enough trust and social satisfaction to get willing contribution?
What new incentives, what new forms of digital comradeship do you have to invent to effectively expand that zone of indifference and get real commitment from someone you only see on a screen?
That, I think, is the ultimate test of Barnard's timeless theories in the 21st century.